Anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews, is the world's oldest hatred. Throughout its ugly history, it has spanned many cultures and has taken many forms. One of its uglier manifestations is religious anti-Semitism, also known as anti-Judaism. This form of anti-Semitism is particularly destructive, being responsible for blood libels which incited riots against Jews ending in Jewish massacres. The Inquisition, where Jews were forced to convert to Catholicism or be expelled or in some cases executed, and the Crusades which ravaged Jewish communities throughout Europe. But what is the origins of this Christian anti-Semitism that has characterized Christianity's relation with Judaism throughout its history? It starts in the very beginning of Christianity's founding. The earliest Christians were all Jews and believed Jesus to be the Jewish Messiah. This belief did not resonate with most Jews at the time, and this caused uneasy tensions and animosity from the Christians to their Jewish brethren, who slowly started to see themselves as separate and apart from the rest of the Jews at that time who did not accept their messianic claims about Jesus. As these Christians came to write down their early history, their portrayal of Jews reflected this animosity they had towards them. They are referred to as children of the devil, are accused of killing Jesus and the prophets, are stiff-necked unbelievers, are ignorantly zealous, are incurably stubborn, are blinded by their own disbelief, and aren't even real Jews. Of the books of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew is arguably the most anti-Jewish of all the books of the New Testament. It is the only book of the New Testament that puts the blame of Jesus' death on all of the Jews for all of time who willingly accept this guilt by their statement, "His blood be upon us and our children." This statement has been used to justify ugly and horrible anti-Semitic beliefs and actions throughout history, to the point that the Pope had to walk back its meaning. But did Matthew actually change the words of Jesus himself to make him appear more anti-Semitic? To answer this question, we must look at what was Matthew's source of information for the words of Jesus that he recorded, and if he edited them at all. When comparing Matthew to the other Gospels, we find something very interesting. Almost all of Mark's Gospel is copied over in Matthew, in usually the same order, and in most instances, word for word with how it's written in Mark. This is especially noteworthy considering that Jesus spoke in Aramaic and Matthew and Mark record the sayings and stories of Jesus in Greek. Some of the stories in Matthew show that they were copied from Mark, but with changes that made them less sensible, such as with the case of the execution of John the Baptist. When Matthew copies this story, he adds that Herod wanted to kill him, a detail not found in Mark. This makes the story less sensible, as Matthew then writes how Herod was distressed at having to kill John the Baptist, which comes from Mark's Gospel. Luke's Gospel as well has borrowed a lot of its material from the Gospel of Mark, and like Matthew, also changes it at times. But there are also a number of stories and sayings in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, but are not found in Mark. They must have both gotten it from the same source. This source is called Quell, the German word for source, or Q for short. When looking at Q as recorded in Matthew and Luke, we find something peculiar. Matthew and Luke quote Q differently, and there is a noticeable pattern in how Matthew quotes Q. In Luke, John the Baptist is recorded as rebuking the crowds coming to be baptized by him by calling them brood of vipers, as the prophets did in order to invoke them to repent. However, in Matthew, it is only the Pharisees that John calls brood of vipers in an effort to delegitimize them. In Luke, Jesus teaches his disciples a parable about the blind leading the blind, that how both will fall into a pit. In Matthew, he is not teaching this to them as a parable, but using it against the Pharisees. In Luke, Jesus is accused by some of driving out demons through the power of Beelzebul. But in Matthew, it is the Pharisees accusing Jesus of using the power of Beelzebul to drive out demons. So we see that Matthew had a clear anti-Pharisaic bias when recording the stories of Jesus. But did he also have an anti-Jewish bias? We do see an example where he does. In Luke, Jesus remarks how the faith of the centurion is greater than all he has found in Israel. In Matthew, he says that as a result of the centurion having more faith than those in Israel, the people in Israel will be replaced by Gentiles who come from the east and west. This is called replacement theology, that the Jews have been replaced by God with Gentiles, because they did not have faith. This idea is found in Matthew, as throughout his gospel, he refers to the Jews as Israel. However, once they reject Jesus and call for his death, they are no longer called Israel but simply Jews. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus says that he was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. But after his resurrection, having been rejected by the Jews, he proclaims that his message is now for all the nations. This is hinted to in the beginning of his gospel, where it's Gentile magi who come to Bethlehem looking for the Messiah to worship. Yet the Jewish sages, knowing the birthplace of the Messiah based on their scriptures, do not join them.